Well, hello everyone. I'm Kate Corkery, and I've been running a storytelling club at the Irish Cultural Centre for the last practically 20 years. And the club was called Around the Fire. And it was where stories were told, not only from Ireland and all parts of Ireland, but from around the world. And I would host these evenings, and please God, we'll manage to do them again in person. And I won't find myself here in an empty Irish Centre telling stories to the air. But it's important to keep telling stories, especially now. Long ago, on cold, dark evenings, our ancestors didn't have what we have now. No form of camera, TV, computer. They just had each other, and hopefully the fire. And stories that were told around those firesides went on night after night after night, like our favourite soap operas now. You'd be waiting to see what would happen next. So what I thought I would do is to reintroduce you to some of the characters from our best stories. You probably know them or have heard of them already, and if you haven't, I hope to introduce you to them and hope that you'll get to love them as much as I do. You see, Irish mythology can be divided mainly into 4 sections. The first section is the mythological cycle. And in the mythological cycle of Irish mythology, you have the Tuatha Danann. And these were the gods, the semi-divine creatures who were gifted. They were gifted with art and crafts and poetry and magic and music. And they were good-looking. And they were gods and goddesses in charge of different things to do with nature, the sea, the land, the rivers. Now, they were divine and wonderful, but they had enemies, and the enemies were the opposite. The enemies were the Fomori. They were uncouth, they were rude, they were vulgar, they were ugly, tyrants. So I'd like to tell you a story from that cycle, and there's a picture here in the front of a book I wrote a couple of years ago called Cork Folk Tales, where all the stories in this collection are from the county of Cork. And the one on the front cover depicts a man holding a baby. Well, I'll begin at the beginning. Long time ago, fado, in the time when the Tuatha Danann lived in Ireland, the gifted people, there was a smith. His name was Govnu. He was a wonderful smith. He had a forge, they say, on a tiny island called Crow Island off the coast of Cork, down beyond Dursey. And he was happy there making swords for the warriors of the Tuatha Danann, making implements for farmers. He even repaired passing ships. Very hard-working Govnu, very generous man. He would give, he had special beer that he would share with people, and you could drink as much as you wanted of it, you'd never get drunk, but you'd only live longer and feel healthier. Isn't that great? Now Govnu, being a hard-working, generous smith, maybe people recognise that in him, because one day he got a wonderful surprise, because up out of the sea walked this amazing cow. She was green and white, this magnificent big cow. The cow of plenty, they called her. Down on the Beara Peninsula in West Cork, there's a lot of legends as well about the Cailleach Beara, and she's the goddess of cows and the land goddess. But this was an actual cow. And this cow was amazing, a really independent cow. It could jump in a second from the island, and it could wander up and down from north to the south of the mainland, and it would give milk generously to anyone who asked for it. A wonderful cow. Now, because Govnu loved this cow, he made a halter for it. And since he made the halter for the cow was very faithful to him. And even though she might wander the land, she would always come back in the evening and stay right by him in the forge, a little paddock he had for her there. Now that was fine, but because she was such a magnificent, generous, magical cow, it aroused some jealousy. Some jealousy from those around him, but mainly jealousy from the Fomori, who were always raiding cattle up and down the coast. And of course the leader, the chief tyrant himself of the Fomori, was Balor of the Evil Eye. And Balor did indeed have poison in his eye, death poison in his eye. Now this uncouth, rude, fierce warrior, when he was a boy, he was walking past a little tower where the druids were mixing a potion, and the steam from the potion rose up, and he was peeping in a crack in the wall, and that poison went into his eye. It knocked him down on the ground. When the druids came out, they told him he had death poison in that eye, and that anybody he would look at with that eye would drop dead. So he better keep it shut amongst his friends and family. And they said that he would be invincible as he grew up for the rest of his life, only that one person alone could kill him, and that would be his grandson. Well, when Balor was a boy, that meant nothing to him. He went on to grow up to be a fierce warrior. He married Kathleen of the Crooked Teeth, and somehow between them they had the most beautiful daughter. I don't know how they did it. Her name was Ethne. Now, when they had Ethne, he suddenly remembered the prophecy of the Druids, and he thought, oh, Ethne must never marry. She must never have a child. I must never have a grandson. So he built a beautiful white tower for her, and he kept her in there with her 12 maid servants to keep an eye on her. He warned them, never talk about men. She must never meet a man. She mustn't know that men exist. She must know nothing about them. So the maid servants kept quiet, and Ethne spent her time in this tower, looking out from the top room out onto the sea, where she'd see people in currachs, interesting looking creatures. Didn't know what they were. She would ask the maidservants, what's that? And the maidservants didn't tell her. Anyway. So things were going fine until one night when Governor was asleep, one of Balor's messengers came to steal the cow. Lucky enough, Governor woke up. He grabbed the cow's tail. He saved the cow, but the messenger made off with a halter. Now, when the halter had vanished, there was no holding the cow. You know, her independent nature, she wanted to wander here and there, and there was a danger she'd never come back. He had a fierce job trying to keep an eye on the cow, make all these swords for the Tuatha Danann warriors. It was difficult. And then one day, along comes Fionn. Now, Fionn was a brother of his, but he was also a warrior, very proud warrior. And Fionn, he said, can you make me a sword? Can you make me a keen, sharp death biter? I can, said Governor, but you know, times are hard at the moment because I can't keep an eye on the cow and work in the forge. If you can keep an eye on the cow for me, I'll make your sword. Right, says Fionn, I'll keep an eye on the cow. Governor goes to make the sword, Fionn goes to watch the cow. After a while, along comes a little red-headed boy with a bit of a squint. What are you doing, sir? I'm keeping an eye on this cow while my sword is being made. Oh, I've come to tell you your sword is ready, sir. I'll keep an eye on the cow for you. You go in and see what your sword is like. And of course, you may have guessed from the squint in the eye and the red hair, that was Balor in disguise. And didn't he run with the cow into the sea and they disappeared? By the time Fionn and Governor came out, there was no sign of them. Governor was furious. Fionn was embarrassed to be tricked so easily and so quickly like that. He promised, he vowed, he gave his word that he would go after that cow. He would not only bring back the cow, he'd bring back the halter and he'd make amends. He ran to the shoreline. There on the foggy shoreline was a small boat. In the small boat was an old man with a long white beard. He said, old man, can you take me to Tory Island, to Balor's Island? What would you give me in payment? Said the man. Well, what would you ask? He said, I'd ask for half of anything you got on Balor's Island. Right, I give you my word, I will give you half of anything I get on Balor's Island. Now please, can you go? Now, in spite of the oldness of the man and the smallness of the boat and the wind and the waves against them, they were over there in no time at all. And when they arrived at the rocky shore of Tory Island, and when Fionn was about to get off the boat, he said, thank you, he said. You've done me a great service getting me here so quickly. I've nothing to pay you with, apart from my cloak, he said. And the old man said, let's exchange cloaks then. Take my cloak. And he wrapped his old cloak around him. And when he wrapped the cloak around him, the old brown cloak began to shiver and shimmer. And all the colour of the sea and sky was in it. And he said to Fionn, you'll be safe wearing that cloak. You can move unseen, and doors will be open to you. Well, indeed, Fionn felt very protected in that cloak. There was something magical about that cloak. And he stepped ashore, and he looked back to thank the man again, but the man had gone, and the boat had vanished. And now there he was, walking around alone on the shore of Tory Island. He could see up ahead outside a castle there were some fierce-looking soldiers guarding the gate. But with the cloak around him, he was unseen. So he walked and he moved amongst them. He walked right into the court of Balor himself. There was Balor sitting on his throne. He said, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" "I've come to offer you service," said Fionn. "What service can you offer me?" "I can make anything you wish to grow on the island." "Oh, you can you? Can you make apple trees grow on this rocky soil?" "I can," said Fionn. "Right," said Balor. "We'll start tomorrow." So there it was. Fionn got a job as gardener for Balor. Next morning, bright and early, off he went around the island planting apple trees. But of course, he wasn't really just interested in planting apple trees. He was looking everywhere for that cow who could roam and graze around the island, or for the halter. And if he got the halter, sure, the cow would follow. But he saw no sign of either. And as he was walking towards evening and the sun was beginning to set, he saw this beautiful marble white tower. And he walked towards the tower and he just pressed the door and it opened. And he walked inside and he tiptoed past a room full of sleeping maidservants. And then he found himself walking up the spiral staircase. And in the top room, he saw the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen in his life. And there she was, looking out to sea and sighing and humming to herself, a beautiful silvery voice she had. And then, as if she sensed someone in the room, she said, "Who is there that I cannot see?" And Fionn dropped his cloak. And she beheld that creature that she had been dreaming of night after night. And Fionn beheld the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen in his life. And they sank into each other's arms. They fell madly in love. Oh, madly in love. And from that moment on, every hour he could get, he spent in the tower, in secret, with Ethne. Time passed. And in time, guess what? Ethne gave birth to the most beautiful baby boy. Oh, his face was shining, his eyes were sparkling. He was so beautiful, they called him Lou, which means light. It was happy, but it was also worrying, because it was the time when the apples were now ripe on the tree and Fionn's work on the island was done, and it was time for Balor to pay him what he asked for, because the only thing he asked for in payment was the halter of Governor's cow. Didn't ask for money. And Balor had promised that he could have the halter to Governor's cow, but when the time was getting nearer, there was no way Balor wanted to part with that. So he sent some of his servants to hide this halter in Ethne's tower. And when the servants came to plank the halter in the tower, they heard that sound. The sound of a baby crying. And Ethne, well, she was just looking out the top window, and she knew that the servants had heard the sound of the baby crying. She knew the baby was in danger. She knew that if her father found out she'd had a child, a grandson, then he was sure to put the baby to death. So when Fionn came that evening, when Fionn came proudly with a branch with ripe, beautiful apples on the branch, he said, "My darling, I bring a gift to you. The first apples are for you." "Thank you," she said. "And my love, I have a gift for you. It is the halter of Balor's cow. You must take it and you must leave, and you must also take with you our baby, our son. He's not safe here. If my father finds out he exists, he will put him to death. Please go quickly. You have no time to waste." With trembling hands, she handed over her baby. Fionn took the child, took the halter, wrapped the cloak around them. He ran to the shore. The old man was still in the boat on the shore. "Old man," he said, "take me away." And he jumped in the boat. And in no time they made their crossing to Tory Island, from Tory Island over to Crow Island. And as they were reaching the shore, the old man said, "You remember your bargain?" "I do," said Fionn. I promised to give you half of anything I got. on Ballar's Island, but all I got was the halter and the baby. I cannot give you the halter, I gave my word. Then I will take the child, said the old man. But don't worry, he said. I will mind him well. I will have him fostered. I will have him taught everything he needs to know. Well, said Fionn, if you must take my child, take back your cloak and mind him well. And he wrapped the cloak around the old man and the child. And when he did that, the old man's eyes were shimmering, his face was glowing, and the cloak began to shimmer with every colour of the rainbow. And there was a sound from the cloak like the water rushing on the shore. And as Fionn stepped on land with the halter, he looked at his baby in the arms of this old man. And the old man said, don't worry, Fionn, son of Dian Kecht of the Tuatha Danann. I am Manannan MacLear, I am God of the sea, and I will mind your child. And when you see him next, he will be riding over the waves, and nothing will bar his way. He will have my white horse, he will have my sword, and nothing will ever come in his way. You need not worry. And as the boat sailed off, without oars, without sails, it ripped through the water. And the water and the waves was curling on either side of it as it sped along, and the fishes of the sea were swimming before and after it. And then Fionn turned with the halter and he went to the forge. And Govnu was delighted to see the halter, and as soon as he held it in his hand, who comes up out of the ocean but the Glasgow herself, the magical cow, the cow of plenty, come back to her rightful owner, happy to put that halter around her neck. Fionn was given his sword, and Govnu went back to his forge. And that was the end of the story, but let me tell you, that boy grew up, you know, that little baby grew up to be a magnificent warrior, soldier, and god. In fact, he was Lu, the god of the sun god. And indeed, he does rise up on the horizon, and he shines with his rays across the sea and the land. And they say, down in West Cork by Misson Head, not only does he shine over the land in the day, but at night he rises up from the west and goes right across the sky to set in the east. And that constellation of stars you can see down there is called Lu's Chain. They also say that sometimes, if you stand there at night, you can hear the tapping at the forge, because Govnu comes back sometimes and he lights the fire to continue his work. But I don't know, that might be only a story. Snip, snap, snout. That story is out. So that was a story from the mythological cycle of Irish mythology. The next great cycle of Irish mythology is the Ulster Cycle. The Ulster Cycle, that is a full-on magnificent cycle. Now, you will all have heard of Cuchulainn, the wonderful hero from Ulster. You will probably have heard of the Táin, Bócúine, the brown bull of Cooley. And over there's a depiction on that lovely cloth of a man and a woman having a arm wrestle, because the Táin was all about a power struggle, when Queen Maeve wanted a bull to match her husband's bull so that she could prove she was equal to him in every way. And in the story, which I'm not going to tell you now because it's too long, I'll tell you another time. In the story, Cuchulainn, this young warrior, he's only 15. He, for some strange reason, is the only one who can defend Ulster from Maeve's army and attack. Because for some reason, all those wonderful, strong, brave, trained warriors that were of the Red Branch Knights, none of them were able to help him. They were struck down with some mysterious disability. But I know where that came from. So I'm wondering, would you like to hear that story? I'll tell it anyway. Long time ago, there was a man called Chronicle. Chronicle was a rich landowner up in Ulster. He had fine lands, good stock of cattle, nice forge, nice house, servants. He married, he had 4 sons. But sad thing was, his wife died. So poor old Chronicle was lonely and sad. The house wasn't the same without his wife. Now, one day he was sitting at home by himself, as usual. And into the room walked this beautiful woman. She was tall, dignified, long straight hair, long neck. She walked into the room and she sat on the other side of the fire, right next to him. She said nothing. He said nothing. She even poked the fire and sat there quietly. After a little while, she went and she started preparing the utensils for a meal. She started cooking. She looked like she knew where everything belonged. She started to clear around the house. When it was mealtime, the children came and they sat around the table together with the quiet woman. Nothing was said. Nobody spoke, but they ate a beautiful meal. Later on that evening, she sat again by the fire, after she had milked the cow, after she had told the servants what they needed to do for the next day. Eventually, Chronicle went to his bed. She stayed by the fire. She sorted the house out for the night. But later, she went and lay next to him in his bed. You can imagine he was quite pleased with this. And so it went on. This mysterious, beautiful, capable, dignified woman became his wife. He was so happy. She was so happy. They seemed to love each other. She was good for him. He prospered even more. The children were happy. The household was happy. Everything was wonderful. That should be the end of the story. But of course it isn't. There was an annual fair used to happen in Ulster every year. And it was a great assembly. Oh, it was the time of year when all the chieftains got together. And obviously there was some buying and selling, but there was also a lot of drinking and celebrating and carousing. There was a lot of sports, and there was particularly a lot of racing. Oh my God, they loved their horses and their racing. And at this big assembly where there'd be bards and there'd be druids and there'd be singers and there'd be storytellers, and people would be exchanging news, and the bards would be reciting big praise poems to the chieftains and the kings. It was a wonderful time of year. It was a great celebration that you didn't want to miss. And Chronicle went there every year. And this year he said to his wife, he said, "It's the time of the assembly," he said. "Would you like to come with me?" "No," she said. "No. I don't want to go with you to that assembly," she said. "And I don't want you to go either." "Why?" he said. "I always go. It's a great thing. You'll enjoy it. There's plenty to eat and drink, plenty of people to meet." "No," she said. "No, you go if you must. But you must tell nobody about me, that I'm here." And you know, they lived in such a remote place, nobody outside the household knew that she lived there. "Will you promise? Will you promise you will not let slip that I am here? Because if you do, you'll never see me again." "All right. All right," said Chronicle. "If you feel that way about it, I won't mention a word that you're here, but can I go?" "Go if you must." Well, maybe he thought that she was being a little bit self-conscious because she was, after all, about to have a baby. And often women, waiting their time, don't feel like doing many things. So off he went to the assembly, and it was fantastic. He met people he hadn't met for months. And he was biting his lip, because he wanted to say to them, "Do you know, I'm so happy. Things are going so well for me. I have a wonderful wife and everything's going great." But he didn't. But of course there was mead and there was wine and there was drink flowing and everybody was having a great time. And the excitement of the races, it was magnificent. And the big build-up of the day, of course, was the king's horses. The king, it probably was Conor MacNassa himself, I do believe, that was there with his beautiful golden chariot and his 2 finest horses. And my goodness, those horses were magnificent. And of course, as predicted, they won every race. And because they won every race, the king was glowing with pride. And the bards were saying, oh, there's nothing better in Ireland. There's nothing can run faster than the king's horses. They're the most amazing horses. Nothing could ever outrun them. And of course, by now, Chronicle is there. He's really enjoying the crack and he's drinking back. And he says, my wife could run faster than the king's horses. And you know, as soon as he said it, he knew he had said something wrong, because there was a hush on the crowd and everybody looked at him. What did you just say? He said that his wife could run faster than the king's horses. His wife. What an insult, they said. What an insult to the king's horses. And the king himself heard it. He said, seize that man. Imprison him. Bring his wife here to prove his word. So with that, the soldiers grabbed him and they held him back and they threw him in prison. Send messengers to fetch that woman here and to race against the king's horses. Well, the messengers were sent out to Chronicle's house. When they came to the door, she opened and she said, yes, can I help you? She said, the king has ordered that you come now to the assembly. No, she said, I do not wish to go to the assembly. I'm about to have a child and I don't want to go very far from my home. Well, your husband has boasted that you can outrun the king's horses, and unless you prove that what he said was true, he's going to be put to death, so you won't have a husband. Oh, she said, he shouldn't have said that, but I will go with you. So she went. She went with the messengers, and they arrived at the fair, and all these people who had probably been drinking all day, they were there going, oh, look, there's the woman who's supposed to outrun the king's horses. Would you look at her? Would you look at her? And she was so embarrassed. She felt so disrespected. She felt so uncomfortable. She said, why have you brought me here? You're going to run against the king's horses. But you can see I'm not fit to run. I'm about to have a child. And she said, look, all of you've had mothers yourselves. You have sisters. You know what it's like. And the king said, your husband boasted that you're faster than the king's horses. Unless you prove that you can run against them, he will be put to death. She said, but can I beg that you give me some time? Maybe after I've had the children, then I will run against the king's horses. You'll do it now. Today is the day of the assembly. You will run now or never. All right, she said. All right, I will run. But if I have to run, I will put a curse on all of you men who are here today. I will put a curse on you, that any one of you who are needed in battle will suffer the pains of a woman in labour for 5 days and 4 nights. Any time you are most needed, you will be most incapacitated. Bring the horses. The horses were brought out. She lifted her skirts and they ran. And Macha, for that was what her name was, she ran, she stretched her long legs out, her hair flew back behind her, and Macha strode out past the king's horses, and she outran them without effort. And when she arrived at the finishing line, there and then she screamed and gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. She said, forevermore my name will be on this place, Awen Macha, the twins of Macha. And the curse that I put on all of you, that you will be in a state of pain like a woman in labour giving birth any time you are needed, that curse will be put upon the men of Ulster for 9 generations to come. And so it was. That place is still called Awen Macha, Navan Fort in English. And so it was that when the big battle happened, when Maeve and Alil and their army were attacking Ulster, the only one who was not in a state of labour pains, groaning and moaning around on the ground, was Cuchulainn. And the only reason that he did not fall under the curse was, one, because he was young still, he was only 15, and the curse did not extend to women and children. But the second reason was that he was actually half of the divine people, the Tuatha Danann, because his father was Lugh, this baby, when he'd grown up. But you know, I'd be here forever explaining who was related to who in Irish mythology. But that's the reason why the men of Ulster couldn't fight at the time they were needed. It was because of Macha, the wonderful goddess who put a curse on them. Snip, snap, snout. That story is out. I hope you liked it. You know, when I talk about the Tuatha Danann, the fairy people, they ruled in Ireland for about 250 years. And of course the Fomori were always a problem to them. They were the forces of evil and darkness, as we've talked about. But when the Milesians came, the humans, us, the Celts, when we arrived and basically took over Ireland, it's a big long story about that, but I won't tell you now. But when the Milesians, the humans, the mortals came, the Danann, the beautiful, gifted fairy people, they chose, some people say they chose, some people say they were banished to live underground, to live in the lisses and the forts and the hills, the forests and under the sea. But those wonderful, gifted, divine people of the Tuatha Danann, who in later years became known as the fairies, the Sidhe, the Dinashe, who still come in and out of folktales and stories right down through the generations. As Eni Lenihan, a very fine storyteller, often says, we don't believe in fairies, but they're there all right. And they're in and out of lots of the stories. And the Danann come in and out of the next cycle of stories that I'm going to tell you one from, and that would be from the Fianna cycle. And the Fianna cycle is all around a fella called Fionn. This is a carving of him here, and you can see him in his pose of sucking his thumb. And behind him here on his seat, you can see a fish, and that would be the salmon of knowledge. And they're two symbols strongly associated with Fionn McCool. So maybe I'll tell you a little bit about him to give you a taste for a cycle of the Fianna stories. Now, as I mentioned, the Ulster Cycle, fantastic stories about Cuchulainn, Red Branch Knights, often quite bloody, quite fierce, quite amazing. The Fianna Cycle is a little bit more gentle. There's a fair amount of war and combat as well, but there's a lot of magic and mystery, and there's a lot of nature, and that's why I particularly am fond of Fionn and everything about him. Now, maybe you're hearing the story when it's coming up to Halloween, and if so, all the better, because of course we call it Samhain, don't we? Samhain. Samhain is the time of year, the 1st of November, when the walls, the invisible walls between the fairy world and the human world are very, very thin, and creatures from the fairy world can come out and maybe make mischief amongst us mortals, because they've never quite forgiven us, you know, for banishing them underground, those wonderful gods and goddesses. Anyway, I'm going to begin this story at the beginning. I might even begin before the beginning. I might go before my story. Once upon a time, a long time ago, there was a woman called Myrna of the white neck, Myrna of the beautiful lips. Myrna lived in a whitewashed fortress that was owned by her father, Taig. He was a bit of a half-day Danann, because they intermarried, you know, the fairy kind and the mortals. Anyway, he was gifted. His name was Taig, And the name of the fortress that they lived in was called Dún Almu. It's called after his beautiful wife. Anyway, because Myrna of the white neck and beautiful lips was so gorgeous, obviously lots of chieftains and kings wanted to marry her, and Tig was not too keen to let her go with just anybody. But anyway, she fell in love, and she fell in love with a warrior called Cool, because he was cool. He was handsome, and he was the leader of the Fianna. And the Fianna were the band of warriors that worked for the High King at Tara, and they were there, these very highly skilled, handsome, gorgeous men and women who protected the king, who defended the coast, and who did a lot of hunting and were very famous. And Cool was gorgeous, and she fell in love with him, and he absconded with her. Because he had asked for permission from Tig, can I marry your daughter? Tig said no. He didn't take no for an answer, and therefore they eloped. Now, Tig was not pleased about this. He complained to the High King that the chief of his army, who should be responsible and respectful of women, has gone and absconded with his daughter Myrna. Now, the High King was in an awkward position because he liked Cool, and he obviously respected his druid, and he said to Cool, please return this woman. And Cool said, no, I will do anything else, but I will not return the woman I love. So that was quite awkward for them. So then the High King had to go and call upon the enemies of Cool. Now, you know, it's probably true of everywhere in the world, but in Ireland also you'll find different factions. They will be enemies. They're meant to be on the same side, but they're not. The rival clan to Cool's clan Boshna, which was his branch of the Fianna, was the MacMornas, the Mornas. And to cut a long story short, a fellow called Gull MacMorna killed Cool. And not only killed him, but he managed to take from him a magical treasure bag that Cool always carried. Now Myrna, at this point, was about to have a baby. And she was looking for somewhere for protection. When she heard that Cool had been killed, she was distraught. But not only was she distraught, she feared for her own safety, the safety of her child, and she went to her father to take her back, but her father would not take her back. In fact, he sent men after her to kill her as well. He was so cross with her. And then she went to Tara, to the High King. She begged for protection, but the High King couldn't give her protection there, and he sent her to go off with these two women, these two old wise women. One was a druidess, and one was a wise woman who was very good with herbs and potions. And the two wise women, they went to assist Myrna. And Bovmil, the druidess, she looked in a bowl of bog water. It was like looking at a screen. She said, "Oh, Myrna," she said, "I see danger. I see danger. You are being hunted. Oh, Myrna, you are not safe to stay with us here. No, Myrna, we must flee. We must all flee up the Slieve Blue Mountains. We must hide you, and we must hide this child that's about to be born, for you are in grave danger." "But I'm in no state to run up the mountain," said Myrna. However, they ran from that house, and they went to go up the Slieve Blue Mountains into the thick of the forest. And there on the hillside, Myrna gave birth. And she gave birth to this beautiful, fair-haired baby. But at that point, Myrna was in no state to run any further. And she said to the women, "Take him, mind him, protect him." So they took the child. And they went further up into the mountains. And they found a hidden valley that they thought would be safe. And they made a little bothy there. And there, these two old women, they raised the baby. They minded him, they cared for him, from a baby to a boy, from a boy to a young man. They taught him everything he needed to know. They taught him how to hunt in the forest, how to hunt as good as any of the Fianna. You know, they say to be in the Fianna, you have to run faster than a deer. He could do that. You have to run faster than a deer, even on one leg while you're taking a thorn out of your other foot. He learned to do that. You have to be able to run faster than a deer, even jumping over a tree higher than your head or running under a branch lower than your knee. He could do that. You have to be able to run faster than a deer without making a sound. If you step on a twig and it snaps, you can't join. And you have to look good at all times. Oh, the Fianna, they're very smart. Their hair is braided, and you must not have one single hair astray when you come out of the forest. The young boy could do that. The young boy drank in everything he was taught. They taught him skills of sword fighting. They taught him everything about nature, the animals, the trees, the forests. And the boy grew to be a fine, strong young lad, a strapping, fair-haired young lad. And when they felt they had nothing else they could teach him, they said, well, maybe you could learn more by travelling on. Maybe you could go to the forest and maybe make your way to Finnegas, because Finnegas is a wise poet. And not only must the warriors of the Fianna be great at hunting, they must be great and brave warriors to defend themselves even against 9 other warriors single-handedly, without fear, without trembling. But also they must be gifted in poetry. You have to be able to recite 12 books of poetry by heart, if anybody asks you. And the only one who could teach that, perhaps, would be old Finnegas. And he's often found by the River Boyne, by a little pool in the River Boyne. So the boy went off. Now, there are accounts of him meeting other people along the way that I'm not going to tell you now. I'm going to tell you what happened when he got to the River Boyne. Because when he got to the River Boyne, old Finnegas was there. And old Finnegas had been there for years. Every day he'd been waiting and hoping and praying that one day he would catch it. And one day he would eat it. And one day he would know everything of all the knowledge in the world. And the thing he was waiting to catch was a salmon. Not just any salmon. The salmon of knowledge. The salmon that ate the hazels of knowledge, the berries from the hazel tree that dropped into the pond, and when the salmon would eat the berries, it would be full of knowledge, and the first person to eat that fish would have all the wisdom and knowledge in the world. Well, when the young boy Finn finally found Finnegas, Finnegas was happy for a young fella to be of help to him. He said, boy, yes, you can be of assistance to me. He said, I want you to light a fire for me, boy, and I want you to help me, because today for me is a very special day. After many years, I've caught the fish I've been waiting to catch, and I want it cooked. Now, I'm going to go into the forest. I'm going to sit down and calm myself, and I want you to cook that fish. Whatever you do, don't eat it. Don't touch it. Just call me when it's ready. So the boy, Finn, wanted to do it as he was asked, and he put a stick through the fish, and he lit a great fire, and he put the fish over the fire, and he was turning it very carefully, and it was cooking very nicely, and it was smelling very good. But a little bubble started to appear on the skin of the fish, and just then the stick that he had as a spit, it cracked, and the fish was about to fall into the flames. So the boy, to rescue the fish, Finn, he put his hands into the flames, he rescued the fish, he dropped it on the ground, but a piece of the skin of the fish that had been bubbling up got stuck to his thumb, and his thumb was burning. So he sucked it. He put his thumb in his mouth, and as soon as he tasted that skin, his eyes began to sparkle, his face began to glow, his whole body seemed to light up. And when Finnegas came out of the woods and saw him, he said, you ate that fish? He said, no, sir, I didn't eat that fish. A piece of the skin got stuck on my thumb, that's all. And old Finnegas said, you might as well eat the rest of it now, because the old prophecy said, the first one to eat the fish will get all the knowledge. You might as well finish it. It was probably destined for you anyway. And from now on, boy, whenever you want to know something, whenever you're in doubt and you want to make a wise decision, all you will have to do, put your thumb in your mouth and you'll get an answer. Well, that was a great thing to have, wasn't it? And knowing that gave him some confidence. So as Fionn began to grow up into a young man, and as he had learned here and there how to fight and how to hunt, and he'd learnt about Tara, he'd learnt about the seat of the High King, he learnt that at Samhain, once a year, there was a great gathering. And at that gathering, there was peace. All the factions who had been fighting all year would lay down their arms. And at that gathering, laws would be made and problems would be sorted out by the High King. And at that gathering, there would be feasting and celebration. So the young Fionn, he decided to join the finely dressed people who were making their way up to Tara, to the king's palace. And when he arrived into the big hall, the king looked and noticed the tall, fair-haired young man that he'd never seen before. He said, "Who are you?" And he said, "Your Majesty, I am Fionn, son of Cool, who was leader of the Fianna until he was killed." "Cool? You are son of Cool," said the king. Now there was one person at the back of the hall who was not too pleased about this, and it was Gull MacMorna, the man who had indeed taken the life of his father, Cool. And he said, "Well, you are welcome. I had great respect for your father, even though he did run away with the daughter of my druid." "No, he didn't," said Fionn. "They loved each other, and I am their son, and I am here to prove to you that I am loyal to you, and I want to give you my service." "Well, join the assembly," said the king. "Sit with us." So he sat, and there was food and there was drink. But all of a sudden, in the middle of the evening, the door burst open, and a wind blew in around the hall. And then there was a silence. And after, in that silence, they could hear music. Beautiful, sweet, sweet, fairy music. And the music was so lovely, people began to close their eyes. And people began to fall asleep. And when the music stopped, everybody woke up again. "Oh no," said the king. "Not again, not again, not again. That is a warning from Éowlin of the Flaming Breath. Every year for the last 9 years at Samhain, he has come here with his magical fairy music, making everyone fall asleep. And when everybody is asleep, he burns down Tara with his flaming breath, and nobody can stay awake to defend us." When Fionn heard this, he said, "Your Majesty, can I try? Can I try to defend Tara against Éowlin of the Flaming Breath? If I can do that, Your Majesty, will you then believe I am who I say I am, and will you then agree that I should be the rightful leader of the Fianna, like my father was?" And the king smiled. He said, "Well, boy, you can try. If you can do what the strongest, the bravest, the oldest warriors of the Fianna could not do, then indeed you will be the one who should wear the treasure bag and who should be the leader." Gull MacMorna was laughing. He says he can defend Tara. Let him try. If he does it, I will willingly give him the treasure bag and I will work for him myself. "Well," said Fionn, "where should I go? Where does he come from?" "Well," said the king, "you need to go out of the hall. You need to go onto the ramparts and watch out for what direction he will come from this year. You will be alone, son. Good luck." Well, everybody was watching him as poor old Fionn, the young boy, was walking out of the hall. And as he nearly reached the back door, an old man grabbed him by the wrist. He said, "Boy, are you really the son of Cool?" "I am," he said. "I was the night watchman on the day he was killed. Look, I want to help you. Here, take this spear. There's magic in it. If you take the covering off the spear, touch the spear to your head, and it will help you to stay awake. That's the power it has, to help you stay awake. It might help." "Thank you," said Fionn. And out he went, out onto the ramparts of Tara. And there he was all alone, looking into the dark night. It was a frosty night. It was the 1st of November. It was the night when the walls between the fairy world are very thin and strange things happen. And as he was walking back and forth looking out for any signs of life, he suddenly heard this beautiful music. And the music was so haunting and so beautiful that his eyes closed and his head began to droop, and he could feel himself about to fall asleep, but he was just awake enough to remember the spear. He took the covering off the spear, he touched the spear to his forehead, his eyes opened, and he looked, and there in front of him he saw the most amazing creature. He saw coming out of a liss beyond, walking across the grass, gliding towards him, this huge creature with a big head, and the head had a big mouth, and the mouth was full of flames, like dragon's flames, breathing forth, scorching the grass in front of it. But under this enormous head were long, delicate hands and fingers, playing a beautiful, delicate golden harp. It was from this beautiful harp that the music was coming. And Fionn, with the spear to his forehead and his own sword ready, he tried bravely to lunge against this creature, Éileann of the flaming breath, who had come from the fairy world. But Éileann only laughed. And the flames got bigger and hotter and stronger and nearer. And Fionn did everything he could to try and keep him away from Tara. But it was no good in trying to work with one hand while your other hand was to your forehead. That was no help either. And he thought, if only I could stop that music. If I didn't hear the music, I could use my two hands. I would be fully awake. So Fionn got the idea to flick this little harp away from the long spindly fingers, and the harp flew in the air, and the music no longer played. And when the harp landed at Fionn's feet, he accidentally trod on it, and when he trod on it, the creature before him coughed like he'd been stabbed, like he'd been kicked in the stomach. And not only did he did he cough and bend over, the flames began to shrivel, and the big head began to shrink like a balloon going down. And Fionn realised he didn't have to attack this creature anymore. It was the music that had the magic in it. So he just stood again on that beautiful golden harp. And as he trampled it, the creature began to bend over and cough and splutter and shrink down to the size of a lobster. And it scuttled away over the frosty grass, way into the darkness. And Fionn picked up this mangled harp. And when he got back to the hall, people were yawning and stretching and opening their eyes wide and surprised to see that Tara was still standing and had not been burnt down. And surprised to see the young man holding up the magic harp and saying, "Éileann of the flaming breath will never burn Tara again. Your Majesty, do you believe I am who I say I am?" "I do indeed," said the king. And he called Gurl MacMorna. He called Gurl MacMorna to hand over the treasure bag of the Fianna. And Fionn McCool wore the treasure bag, and from then on, he was the leader of the Fianna. He went on to have so many wonderful adventures, and there were so many great characters in his stories that I could tell you about another time. But Gurl MacMorna, surprisingly, even though he was the arch enemy of his father, he decided that he would work for Fionn, and he would be one of his more loyal companions. But that's the end of the story of how Fionn became the leader, and it happened at Samhain, that magical time of year. Snip, snap, snout. that story is out. So, we've told a story from the Mythological Cycle, we've told a story from the Ulster Cycle, and we've told a story from the Fianna Cycle. And to finish, let's do a little story which is about a king. It's from the historical cycle, but you know what? The historical cycle isn't always historically accurate, but I don't think we mind, because the stories that have come down actually were so wonderful that they are remembered whether they're true or false. I don't know if many of you have secrets, do you? Of course you do. We all have secrets. But the thing is, do you ever talk about them? Do you ever tell them, or do you keep them secret? And what does it do to you if you don't tell your secrets? I heard versions and versions of the story I'm about to tell you. So I'm going to put together a couple of the versions. It appears that long, long ago they were two brothers, and they were sons of the High King. And when the High King died, one of them became the High King, and his name was Labhraidh. And he was lovely. He was good, kind, generous, lovely. But his brother, Kovac, was jealous, understandably. Very jealous. So jealous that it made him sick. He was mean and he was thin. They called him Kovac Quail. Thin Kovac. Bitter, twisted, envious Kovac. And he couldn't bear the thought that his brother was the High King and he wasn't. So he thought of a plan. He pretended he was dead. He told his servants to tell his brother that he was dead. He was laid out on a bier. So of course, Labhraidh, being a nice kind of person and a brother, even though his other brother wasn't very nice to him, he was upset to hear that his brother Kovac had passed away, and he went to pay his respects, and he went with his son and his son's son. And he bent over the corpse to give him one last embrace. But of course Kovac wasn't dead at all. He had a dagger ready, and didn't he kill him? Not only did he kill his brother, the High King, there and then, but he killed the brother's son there and then. Now you can imagine the little boy was devastated. This Kovac character is very dark indeed. I don't want to tell you half the things he did, but he was so evil that the boy who had witnessed what had gone on was traumatized. You would be, anybody would be. So traumatized that he couldn't speak. He could not speak, he could not utter a word. And in a way that saved him. Because at the time, to be a king, to be a High King, you had to be perfect in every way. If you had any deformity or abnormality of any kind, you could not be king. And the fact that the poor child couldn't speak, he was no threat. So Kovac said to his mother, "Take him away. I don't want to see him." But he wasn't going to do him any harm. So the child was taken to Munster, and he was raised by a king down there with his family, and he was happy. In fact, things got better for him because they were welcoming to him and his mother, and the daughter of that Munster king, Moira, she liked him a lot. She was a lovely little girl, full of smiles, and he'd smile back at her, but he didn't speak. And then he started to join in some hurling and some sports that children play. And one day he was so excited when he was watching a match that he shouted for his team. And the fact that words came out of his mouth, everybody looked at the child that was supposed to be dumb and said, "Láirse," which means he spoke. And he got the name Lowry Loinseach. So Loinseach now could speak. And Loinseach was sent to France, to the King of France, and they told the King of France, "Look, this young man could potentially be the High King of Ireland, but he needs to be trained and he needs to be helped." So the King of France helped Lowry to become a soldier, to become a leader, a warrior, a captain, and he grew in confidence. And he grew tall, he grew handsome, and he could speak. And not only that, the young girl in the castle in Munster, who was always smiling, and she'd loved him from day one, she started writing poetry. And she composed a big, long love poem to him. And she sent the bard that her father had, Craftina, to France to recite the love poem to him. So he did that. And that encouraged Lowry to come back from France. And now that he had his confidence, he had his voice, he had the love of a lovely girl whom he wanted to marry, he felt strong enough to go and claim the High Kingship. And indeed he did. And there are versions on how he did this, but the version that I'm going to tell you is he overcame Kovac's army and he became High King. So that was nice, and that could have been the end of that one. But it isn't, because maybe it was his childhood experiences that made him a little cagey, a little odd, a little secretive. I don't know. But he didn't really like company that much. He liked secluded places. And I heard that he went to live in Munster, even though the kingship came down via Leinster, he chose to come down to Munster. In fact, he chose to live in a castle in the middle of Loch Eyne, which is a beautiful lake in West Cork beyond Skibbereen. It is an O'Driscoll castle, but the O'Driscolls were descendants of the kings. And, a castle on an island, very secluded, and that he didn't really wish to see people very much. He wasn't an unkind king or cruel in any way, he just didn't like too many people around him. And he was mostly kind, but once a year, around the time of his birthday, he would need and want his hair to be cut, and a barber would be selected. They drew lots for a barber to be selected to come to the palace, which was in the middle of the lake, to cut his hair. But that barber was never seen again. I'm afraid a lot of them were just put to death, so they say. And they were never seen again. So when the turn came to a young barber, he might have been the youngest one in Ireland at the time, who lived with his mum, who was a widow, she was devastated. She said, "What?" When the royal messenger came to say, "Your son is invited to the palace to cut the king's hair," she said, "But I've heard that the barbers who go to the king's palace, they never come back, and they say that the king, I don't know, they just don't come home again. Will you please," she said, "he's all I have in the world. My boy is all I have in the world. Will you please ask the king to be merciful? And can you please ask him to send my son home after he's cut the king's hair? He'll do a very good job, but please just let him come home again, I beg you." Well, the messenger dutifully remembered the message, and he went with the boy across the lake into the palace, and he showed him into the hall of Lowry Lynch the king, and Lowry Lynch the king was sitting there with his throne on his head, and the messenger bowed before the king, and he said, "Your Majesty, this barber is the youngest one in Ireland this year, and his mother has made a special request that she begs you to send him home when his work is done." And Lowry, like I said, he wasn't mean really, he wasn't cruel. He looked at the boy and he said, "Well, I will allow you home on one condition, once you've done your work. And the condition is you must say nothing, not one word, of anything you may see in this palace today." "Oh, I promise, Your Majesty," said the boy, "I'll say nothing of anything I see in the palace today." "Begin your work," said the king. Well, the messenger left the room. The boy started to begin his work. He took off the king's crown, he put the king's crown down, and he went to sort out his scissors and his tools to cut the king's hair. But when he looked around and when he saw what was growing out of the king's head, he couldn't believe it, because there, growing up through the king's hair, were long, brown, furry horses' ears. No word of a lie. Horses' ears he had under his crown. The boy was shocked, but he said nothing. He pretended he noticed nothing. He washed the king's hair, he dried the king's hair, he cut the king's hair, he put the king's crown back on his head. The king looked at him. "You remember your promise?" "Yes, sir. Your Majesty, I will say nothing of anything I've seen in the palace today. You may go, said the king. Well, the boy flew out of that place, crossed back over the water, ran back home. His mother was delighted when she saw him running down the road. Oh, son, you're home, isn't it wonderful? Oh, you were at the palace and you cut the king's hair and you're home. What was it like? What did the king say? What was the palace like? Tell me everything. And the boy, he was dying to tell his mother everything. The palace was magnificent, you know. There were so many things he noticed, and he opened his mouth to tell her. But of course he couldn't tell her, he couldn't speak. He had to keep quiet. So he said nothing. Ah, sure, you must be overcome with the excitement. Come here, have your dinner. Have something to eat. You can tell me after. She put a nice meal in front of him. He tried to eat, but he couldn't. He couldn't swallow anything. He couldn't swallow, he couldn't eat, he couldn't drink, he couldn't talk. Ah, she said, listen, you're probably tired. Go on away to bed. Have a good old rest for yourself. When you get up tomorrow, you can tell me everything. He went to bed, couldn't sleep. Tossing and turning, couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat, couldn't drink, couldn't sleep, couldn't talk. Went on for days. The mother was really worried. The mother went to the Druid, said, listen, my boy, he's getting thinner and thinner and sicker. I don't know what's wrong with him. And the Druid said, he has a bad dose of secret. That boy has a secret. If he doesn't tell his secret, he's going to die. Oh no, said the mother, that's a terrible thing. Well, said the Druid, he doesn't have to tell his secret to a person. Let him get up early tomorrow morning. Let him go down to the wood. Let him go and tell his secret to a tree when nobody's listening. It will relieve him of the burden and he'll feel a lot better. So that's what he did. The next day he got up and he ran down by the lake and he found this beautiful willow tree. And he whispered to the willow tree, Loinseach, the King of Ireland, has horse's ears. Well, he felt so good when he said it. He felt so good he said it again. Loinseach has horse's ears. And he was laughing, but every time he said it, it was like another weight lifted off his shoulders. And by the end, he was dancing around the tree. He was singing, Loinseach has horse's ears, the king has horse's ears. Loinseach has horse's ears, the king has horse's ears. And the boy ran home with a smile on his face, and he ate a fine meal, and he chatted to his mother about this, that, and the other. He didn't tell the secret, but he talked about lots of other things, and he was happy ever after that. But it just so happened around that time was the time of the king's birthday, and Fianna, the bard that we mentioned earlier, he had broken his harp. And he was preparing to recite a beautiful new song, sing a new song for the king on his birthday. And he was down in the woods looking for a piece of wood he could carve into a new harp. And would you believe it? He found a nice piece of wood that had fallen off that willow tree. And he spent all day carving it into a beautiful harp, and he put beautiful golden strings on it. And that night it was all ready for the big celebration, the king's birthday. And he sat next to the king. And the king was looking magnificent with the crown on his head. All the nobles sitting round. And Fianna was about to sing the new song he had composed. He'd worked hard on it. But before his fingers could touch the harp sang all by itself. Loinseach has horse's ears, the king has horse's ears, ooh. That wasn't the song that Fianna had composed. He tried to retune the harp. Loinseach has horse's ears, the king has horse's ears, ooh. Well, he didn't know what to say, but the words were loud and clear, and everybody heard the words. And the king himself heard the words, and he felt so embarrassed he didn't know where to look. He wished the ground would open up and swallow him. And he put his head down in embarrassment, and the crown nearly fell off his head, and a child nearby just lifted the crown. But there for all to see were these long, brown, furry horses' ears. Now there are two versions to the ending of this story. One version is that the people, after their initial astonishment, they praised the king for his unusual and exotic look. And Loinseach felt that his secret was out, but nobody was admonishing him for it, nobody was going to punish him for it, he was not going to be deposed because of it, so therefore He didn't put any more barbers to death, and they lived happily ever after, and everybody accepted him for what he looked like and who he was. A very good king. But there's another version that comes from Lochine, and they say that as soon as the crown fell from his head, Loinseach, he ran out of that castle and he jumped into the lake, and he joined all those amazing exotic aquatic creatures that you can find in that lake to this day. It's one of the centres of biodiversity in Ireland, and it's world renowned for the things that swim and live in the depths of the beautiful lake. Well, you can take what version you like as an ending. But that's the end of my story from the historical cycle. Semi-historical, I'd say. I hope you enjoy them. I hope it gives you an interest in our own Irish mythology and folklore, and there are plenty more stories from where they came from. Snip, snap, snout. This story is out. Gora míle maith.